The rifle was already in her hands before she knew she'd grabbed it. Corporal Reed was down, blood on the snow. No shooter left standing. No time left to think. The convoy was 90 seconds from the crossing point, and every weapon that could stop it was either jammed broken or buried in the hands of a man who wasn't breathing right anymore. Evelyn Carter pressed her back against the rock, felt the cold bite through her jacket, and made the only decision that was left. She was done being invisible. If this story hit you in the chest, stay with us until the end. Subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The mission briefing had lasted 11 minutes. 11 minutes to explain a convoy a valley, a narrow crossing point, and a window of time so tight that the operations officer had used a stopwatch to illustrate it. 11 minutes to lay out the positions, the egress routes, the contingencies. And then the briefing officer had looked around the table at the 4-person reconnaissance team and said with the practiced calm of a man who had never once been shot at in a mountain pass, "This is a monitoring assignment. Observe document report. You are not authorized for direct engagement unless the situation becomes critical." Staff Sergeant Evelyn Carter had written that down. She had written it down because writing things down was what she did. It kept her hands busy and her face neutral and her thoughts from showing up in her expression, which was a skill she had developed over years of sitting in rooms where people said things that deserved a harder response than silence, but received silence anyway because she had learned a long time ago that silence was the only weapon that never got taken away from you. She sat at the far end of the table. Corporal Mason Reed sat next to her close enough that she could feel the warmth off his shoulder, which was the only warmth in that room. He had a habit of doing that, positioning himself near her, not because he needed the proximity for any tactical reason, but because he understood without ever saying it that she sometimes needed to know there was someone on her side. He didn't say anything during the briefing. He rarely did. He had the rare intelligence of knowing when words were useless. Private First Class Daniel Okoye sat across from them, young enough that his face still had the particular tension of someone trying to look like he belonged in a room full of people who had been places he hadn't. He was their secondary communications operator and had just transferred into the unit 6 weeks ago. He was good at his job. He was also scared in the way that honest, competent people are scared, which is the healthy kind of scared, the kind that keeps you careful. Their primary shooter, Sergeant First Class Aaron Volk, sat at the opposite end of the table from Evelyn. He had not looked at her once during the entire briefing. Volk was the kind of soldier who had assembled his self-image entirely from the opinions of people who outranked him, which meant he was obedient upward and something else entirely downward. He was a technically proficient marksman, with a service record that looked impressive on paper, and a personality that wore you down, like weather. He had been running range exercises with the unit for 8 months, and in those 8 months, he had said 4 things directly to Evelyn Carter. 3 of them were mission-related. 1 of them was not, and she had chosen not to repeat it. She wrote down the coordinates for the crossing point. She wrote down the weather window. She wrote down the extraction protocol. And then the briefing was over, and they were moving out in 2 hours, and the only thing left to do was prepare. The mountain did not care about their timeline. By the time they reached the observation position, the temperature had dropped 12 degrees and the wind had shifted twice, and Daniel Okoye was already fighting with the communications equipment, which had developed the kind of intermittent fault that manifests only under field conditions and never during any test run in any controlled environment in the history of military operations. He worked on it with focused hands and muttered quietly to himself, which Evelyn recognized as concentration and not complaint. Volk was already set up with the primary weapon, a heavy, beautifully calibrated long-range rifle that the unit had requisitioned specifically for this operation. He had settled into his position with the practiced ease of a man who had done this 100 times, which he had and was already running his pre-op scope calibration, and everything about his posture said that this was his moment, his mission, his shot, and the rest of them were support personnel. Mason crouched beside Evelyn. "Radio's intermittent," he said quietly. "I know. If it drops completely, we can't call for adjustment on the extraction window." "I know that too." "You think it'll hold?" Evelyn looked at Daniel, who was still working jaw-set fingers precise. "He'll make it hold as long as it can be held." Mason nodded. He pulled his jacket tighter and looked out at the valley below. The snow was heavy. The light was flat and gray, and the kind of cold that makes the world look like it has been photographed rather than lived in. How long until the convoy? 40 minutes, maybe 50 if the road conditions slowed them. Command confirmed the count. How many vehicles? 4 armored, 2 supply trucks behind. Lead vehicle will be the one that matters. It's carrying the command equipment. Take out the lead, the whole convoy stops at the crossing. They can't reverse in that pass, can't go around. It creates a 12-hour delay minimum on their forward position resupply. And we just watch. We just watch, Evelyn said. Mason looked at her sideways. She kept her eyes on the valley. "You're thinking something," he said. "I'm always thinking something. You're thinking something specific." She didn't answer, which was for Mason an answer. He had known her long enough to understand that her silence wasn't absence. It was wait. The first shot came from the eastern ridge. Nobody was ready for it. That was the thing about the first shot in any engagement. No matter how many times a soldier experienced it, no matter how many briefings and training exercises and close calls had preceded it, the first shot always arrived as a complete surprise because the human body is not designed to remain in a state of combat readiness for extended periods without the mind beginning to blur the edges of possibility. And in the 31 minutes they had been in position without incident, the edges had blurred just enough. Evelyn felt rather than heard it, a change in the air, a crack, and then Mason was down. Not all the way down. He had dropped sideways behind the rock formation they were using as cover, and she was moving before she had consciously registered any decision to move, because that was what years of combat medicine did to you. It removed the deliberation from emergency response and replaced it with motion. Pure practiced motion. She reached him in less than 3 seconds. Mason, look at me." His face was white. Not frightened white, pain white, which is a different thing entirely. It's the whiteness of a body, redirecting every resource toward managing something catastrophic. He had been hit in the upper left side below the shoulder. She could see the entry point, and she was already cutting away the layer of jacket with the small blade she kept accessible on her vest, her hands working while her mind catalogued and assessed with the same cold precision she had applied to coordinates in that briefing room. "Tell me where else," she said. "Just the side," he managed. "Your arm, feel your fingers." "Fingers work." "Good. That's good." She was applying pressure, her whole body weight leaning into it, her other hand pulling a trauma dressing from her kit. "You're going to tell me you're fine." "I'm completely fine," he said through teeth that were pressed too hard together to be fine. "You're an idiot." Also possible. From behind them, Volk's voice cut through. "Sniper on the eastern ridge. I have eyes. I need clear air time to track Carter. You need to keep him behind cover." "I'm working, Volk." "He's a liability if he moves." "Then he won't move, Okoye." She didn't raise her voice. She had learned not to. "Radio. Trying," Daniel said. The wind had picked up. "I'm getting fragments. Command is receiving partial, but they're not confirming clear. I think they're getting us, but I can't confirm they're getting the full picture. Tell them we have a man down. Tell them we have a sniper eastern ridge, and tell them we need updated authorization status because our situation has changed." "Copy." Evelyn pressed the dressing into place and looked up. The valley was still empty. The convoy had not appeared yet. 30 minutes, maybe less. "Volk," she said. "Can you get the sniper?" "Negative. He's behind cover on that ridge. I have a partial position but not a clean shot. If I fire and miss, I give up our position." "He already has our position." "He has a general position. He doesn't know exact. If I fire, he knows exact." That was sound reasoning. She hated that it was sound reasoning. "So we hold." "We hold." Mason had his eyes open and was watching her with the particular expression he got when he was processing something. She recognized it because she had seen it before in quieter moments when he was working through a problem he hadn't decided to share yet. "Evelyn, don't talk. I need to say something. You need to stay still. Evelyn." His voice was low enough that only she could hear it. The sniper isn't trying to hit us." She stopped. She looked at him. "He hit me on the first shot from that range in that wind, and I went down," Mason said. "But I didn't go down hard. You've seen what a real precision shot does. That wasn't a kill shot. He had the angle." She understood what he was saying. She turned the idea over rapidly and felt the cold certainty of it settle. If the shooter on that ridge had wanted Mason dead, Mason would be dead. It was a wounding shot. A shot designed not to kill, but to slow, to occupy, to fill the next 30 minutes with medical emergency instead of mission. "He's covering the convoy," she said. "He's covering the convoy." She looked at Volk. Volk was still tracking eye to scope, working his search pattern. And she looked at the primary rifle, that heavy, beautiful weapon. And she looked at the valley, and she looked at the position they were in, and she began doing the mathematics of the next 30 minutes. "Okoye," she said. "What's the command response?" "Fragmentary. I think they're acknowledging the man down, but I cannot confirm extraction authorization. I'm going to keep trying." "What about direct engagement authorization, given changed threat profile?" Daniel hesitated. I don't have a clean confirmation on that either. I'm sorry, Sergeant. The link is bad." She nodded. She applied a second layer over the trauma dressing and checked Mason's color and checked his breathing rate and confirmed what she already suspected, which was that the wound was serious and bleeding and needed care, but was not immediately fatal, and that Mason had maybe 40 minutes before blood loss became the primary problem and not the sniper and not the convoy. 40 minutes. The convoy had perhaps 25. From behind her, Volk fired. The sound was enormous in the cold air. Evelyn swung around. "What did you—" "Movement on the ridge. I had a shot." Volk's voice was controlled. "I took it." "Did you hit?" "Negative. Cover moved." A pause. "He's repositioning." "You just told them exactly where we are." "I had a window." "You had a maybe." She was keeping her voice flat with effort. This was not the moment. "What's your status on primary weapon?" "Good. I'm good. When that convoy appears, I'll have the lead vehicle in the first—" He stopped. She heard something mechanical. Then, "Damn it. Volk. Feed jam." His voice changed. "Feed jam on the primary." The silence that followed that statement lasted exactly 2 seconds, which was how long it took Evelyn's brain to fully map the implications. "Can you clear it?" "Working." A pause. More mechanical sounds. The careful, forced calm sounds of a trained operator working a problem against the clock. "The mechanism, the cold got into it. The feed spring is—" "How long?" "To clear properly, 10 minutes minimum." 10 minutes. She looked at the valley. She pulled out her field glasses with her free hand and raised them to her eyes, and she saw exactly what she had been dreading seeing. The convoy had appeared. Not in 25 minutes. Not in 20. Now. The lead armored vehicle came around the long curve of the mountain road with the slow, heavy confidence of machinery that does not expect to be challenged. Behind it she could see the second vehicle and the third, and already she was doing the calculation speed of travel against distance to the crossing point against the terrain narrowing that would create the trap. "How far to the crossing?" Mason asked. He had heard it in her breathing. 2 kilometers, maybe 2:15. Time. She watched the speed of the lead vehicle. She watched the terrain ahead of it. 90 seconds, she said. Maybe a little more. Volk. Mason's voice carried across the position. Status. I need 8 more minutes on this jam. 8 minutes, 90 seconds. Evelyn put the field glasses down. She looked at the weapon Volk had been using, the primary, the heavy one, the jammed one that would take 8 minutes to fix. She looked at her own weapon, a standard-issue rifle, not remotely designed for the distance between their position and the crossing point. She looked at the valley. She thought about the mathematics. She thought about the wind. She thought about the scope on her weapon, which had taken a hard knock against the rock face during the scramble to cover after Mason went down, and which she had not had time to check. She thought about the shot. She thought about who she was. Or rather, she thought about who they believed she was. Evelyn. Mason's voice was very quiet. Just for her. She looked at him. His face had that color. Now the color that meant he was working harder than his body wanted to work to stay conscious and present. And his eyes were clear and very focused, and he said the thing she had not heard anyone say to her in 4 years. Ghost. That name. Just the one word. Just the name she had buried under paperwork and reassignments, and years of silence, and her own deliberate disciplined effort to become someone different. The name she had answered to in another life, in the years before a single good decision had been reframed as insubordination, and a career had been quietly erased. Don't, she said. Someone has to say it. I'm a medic Mason. You're the best shot this unit has ever been near, and we both know it, and there are 90 seconds left, and that convoy has command and control equipment in the lead vehicle that will extend this operation by months if it reaches forward positions, and you know everything I just said is true. She did know. She knew all of it. She reached for her rifle. Volk saw what she was doing. Carter. His voice went hard and fast. Carter, that rifle isn't configured for this distance. You're a medic. You don't have a sniper qualification on your current record. If you fire that weapon in this situation without authorization, you have a jammed rifle and a confirmed sniper shifting position on your 6, she said without looking at him. Address your actual problems, Volk. I'm serious. If this goes wrong, then it goes wrong. She was already prone, already settling into position, already bringing the rifle up and beginning to assess the scope. Okoye. Sergeant. Get me a wind reading. Sustained and gusting, give me both. Daniel moved without hesitation. He read off the numbers. She processed them. The scope. The scope was off. She could see it immediately. The impact against the rock had shifted the 0 point. The question was by how much and in which direction. She had no time for a proper calibration sequence. She had one option, which was a single test shot to calculate the variance, and one shot used for calibration was one shot not used for the target, and she checked the convoy maybe 70 seconds before the lead vehicle reached the crossing. She could not afford a calibration shot, so she would calculate without one. She pressed her cheek against the stock and breathed and let the world go quiet, the way it used to go quiet, the way it had gone quiet 1,000 times in training and a handful of times in the field in the years before she became someone else. The cold ceased to matter. Mason's wound ceased to matter. Volk ceased to matter. The sniper on the eastern ridge, who was repositioning and would have a new angle in less than 2 minutes, he ceased to matter. There was only the valley, the vehicle, the wind, the mathematics. She applied a correction factor for the scope displacement based on the angle of impact and the type of mount and what she knew from 3 years of working this class of weapon. She adjusted manually for the wind. She adjusted for temperature, for elevation, for the curvature of the trajectory at distance. She watched the lead vehicle. She watched the crossing point. She felt the wind shift against her face. A change, subtle, a 2-degree adjustment, and she moved with it, without thinking, the way a musician's hand moves to accommodate a key change. 60 seconds. Mason, she said. Yeah. Tell me something. What do you want me to tell you? Anything. Just say something. A pause. Then quietly from the man bleeding on the rock beside her. You saved 4 people on a mountain in a winter. Nobody remembers but us, and you never once asked for credit, and I have never once stopped thinking that was the most remarkable thing I ever saw a human being do. She breathed in. She breathed out. She fired. The sound rolled across the mountain and came back, and she was already cycling and reacquiring, and she watched through the scope, and for 3 full seconds there was nothing. Just the vehicle moving, just the road, just the crossing point approaching, and then the lead armored vehicle simply stopped. No explosion, no drama, just stopped. Steam began rising from the engine compartment. A precision impact on the cooling and drive systems that turned a moving vehicle into an immovable object at the precise point that mattered. The vehicle sat in the crossing like a stone, and the vehicles behind it slowed, and the convoy compressed, and the narrow pass did exactly what passes do, which is refuse to accommodate things that do not fit. The crossing was blocked. The mission was intact. Evelyn stayed prone for 3 more seconds, watching, confirming what she had done. Then she heard Volk make a sound. She could not immediately identify, and she turned and looked, and Daniel Okoye had his hand pressed flat over his mouth, and his eyes were wide and alive, and Mason had his eyes closed, but he was smiling, which for a man losing blood on a mountain in winter was perhaps the most controlled response available to him. "Ghost," he said. "Welcome back." She didn't answer. She was already back at his side, checking the dressing, checking his pulse, checking his color, because the convoy was stopped and the mission was intact, and Mason Reed was her teammate, and he was still bleeding, and the mountain was not finished with them yet. From the eastern ridge, the sniper had gone quiet. Not because he had been neutralized, because he was moving, which meant their position was already compromised, and the next phase was coming, and there was no extraction window confirmed, and Daniel was still fighting the radio, and the blocked convoy would not stay passive, and Volk was still clearing his jam, and everything that was true 30 seconds ago was still true except for one thing. The crossing was blocked. She had done that. She had done the impossible thing in the 90 seconds available to do it with the wrong weapon and a broken scope and frozen hands and a wounded teammate beside her. And somewhere in the back of her mind, in the part of herself she had packed away and labeled old business, something had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just shifted. The way a door does when someone finally opens it from the other side. The sniper was moving. She reached for her kit. There was more work to do. The sniper was moving, and that meant they had maybe 4 minutes before he found a new angle, and everything they had just bought with that shot became worthless. Evelyn knew it before anyone said it. She had her hand pressed flat against Mason's dressing, and her eyes were already scanning the ridgeline, reading the terrain, the way she had learned to read it in another life. Not by looking at what was visible, but by tracking what had stopped being visible. The eastern ridge had gone quiet in a very specific way. Not the quiet of someone who had given up, the quiet of someone who was moving with purpose. "Okoye." She kept her voice low and even. "How many meters to our secondary position? 60, maybe 65 to the left outcropping. Can we move Mason that distance without aggravating the wound?" Daniel looked at Mason, then at her. He was 23 years old, and he was doing the calculation she already knew the answer to, and she gave him the 3 seconds it took him to arrive at it. "If we move fast and keep him flat, maybe. But the bleeding is controlled enough for 60 meters. After 60 meters, we reassess." She looked at Volk. Volk, primary weapon status. Volk's jaw was tight. He had been quiet since the shot, and quiet from Volk was a different thing than quiet from Mason. It was the silence of a man processing something he did not have a framework for. He cleared his throat. "Feed jam is 80% cleared. 2 more minutes." "You don't have 2 minutes at this position." "I'm aware of that, Carter. So we move." She was already pulling Mason's arm across her shoulders, signaling Daniel with her eyes. "You cover the move. Soon as you have a shot on that ridge, take it. Don't wait for confirmation." "I don't take shots without Volk." Her voice dropped to something that was not loud and was not aggressive, but landed in the air between them like a blade. "The sniper already fired once, and he's repositioning for a second. You want to have that conversation about authorization when he finds his new angle, or do you want to cover your team?" "A beat. I'll cover the move," Volk said. Moving Mason was the hardest 30 seconds of the last hour. How was heavier than he looked, which was always true of soldiers, and he was working hard to manage his own weight and not let it drag them down, which was exactly the kind of thing Mason Reed would do, bleed through his jacket and still try to be useful. He made one sound during the move, a sharp intake of breath when his left side compressed against her shoulder, and then he locked it down and kept moving, and Evelyn matched his pace, and Daniel held his other side, and the 3 of them covered 60 meters in terrain that demanded 45 seconds minimum in 28 seconds flat. They dropped behind the left outcropping. Volk came in last, moving fast and low, and behind him on the eastern ridge. Something shifted a shape, a shadow movement, and Volk turned and fired in a single motion that was almost fast enough. Almost. The shot from the ridge came 3 seconds after Volk's, and it went wide, and Evelyn heard the crack and the impact of stone, and felt the cold spray of shattered rock against her forearm, and then it was over, and they were all behind cover and breathing. "He's good," Daniel said. "He's very good," Evelyn agreed. "Mason, talk to me." "Still here." "Pain level." "Present." "Be specific." 7. Maybe 7.5. He paused. "You want me to lie and say 5? No. 7.5 means I need to manage your bleeding more aggressively." She was already opening her kit, pulling the secondary dressing, her hands moving through the familiar sequence with the mechanical precision of something that had been trained until it became instinct. "This is going to be uncomfortable." "Evelyn." "Hold still." "Evelyn, I need you to listen to me for a second." "You can talk while I work." He waited until her hands had found their rhythm, and then he said it quietly, directly, without any of the softening or hedging that less honest people would have applied. "You just made that shot with a broken scope and a rifle you hadn't touched in months, and 35-knot wind gusts, and your hands were probably 30 degrees colder than optimal. You want to tell me that was just good luck? I want you to stop moving your left side when you breathe. That was Ghost. That was everything Ghost was before they erased her. Ghost is a call sign. It's not a person. It became a person. It was always a person." His voice was rough, but his eyes were steady. "I was there, Evelyn. I was at the debrief 4 years ago. I heard what they said about that patrol. I heard what Hendricks said about the unauthorized engagement and the review board and all of it. And I have never once, not for one single minute, believed any version of that story that made you the person who did something wrong." She pressed the new dressing into place with slightly more force than was strictly necessary. "Ow," Mason said. "Stay still." "I'm serious." "So am I. The dressing needs even pressure." She didn't look at his face. She looked at her hands. "What happened 4 years ago doesn't matter right now. It matters because you've been running from it ever since. You took the medic reassignment, and you kept your head down, and you haven't touched a precision rifle in, I touched one 17 minutes ago. Because you had no other option." "That's exactly right. I had no other option, so I did what needed doing. That's it. That's the whole story." Mason was quiet for a moment. She could feel him watching her work. Then, "The whole story, or the story you've decided to tell yourself." She tied off the secondary dressing and sat back and looked at him. Really looked at him, and he looked back at her with the particular directness of a man who is losing blood and therefore cannot afford to waste what's left on politeness. "Both," she said. "The answer to your question is both." From 3 meters away, Volk was watching her. She felt it the way you feel any unwanted attention, not as a physical sensation, but as a change in the quality of the air. She turned her head, and he was looking at her with an expression she could not immediately categorize, which was unusual, because Volk's expressions were typically very categorizable. He was looking at her the way people look at something they thought they understood, and have just discovered they didn't. "Where did you learn that?" he said. "Learn what?" "You know what." He had abandoned the pretense of looking at the ridgeline. He was looking directly at her. "That was a precision engagement shot. That was not a lucky shot by a medic with a bent scope. I watched your form. I watched your breathing sequence. That was trained. That was deeply trained." A pause. "How long?" She considered not answering. It was a reasonable option. But there were 4 of them on this mountain, and 2 of them needed the truth more than she needed the comfort of withholding it. 8 years of precision training, she said. 3 years of operational application, then 4 years of being a medic. Volk stared at her. 8 years? Yes. You've been qualified at... He stopped, recalibrated. What was your designation? It doesn't matter. Carter. It doesn't matter right now, Volk. What matters is, the convoy is stopped. We have a sniper repositioning on our 6. We have a man down, and we have a communications link that might or might not be reaching command. Those are the problems. Let's focus on those. I was quiet for a moment, and she could see him working through it, processing what he had seen against everything he thought he knew about her. And she recognized the look, because she had seen versions of it before that specific recalibration, that happens when a person realizes they have been operating with fundamentally wrong information and now has to decide what to do with the correct version. Ghost, he said. He said it the way Mason had said it, but differently, not with familiarity with recognition. The kind of recognition that comes from hearing a name in a briefing room, in a story, in a piece of operational history that gets passed around among people who care about that kind of thing. That was you. She turned back to Mason's dressing. Okoye, she said. Radio. Daniel had the radio stripped to its component parts and was running the fault sequence by hand, which was not the recommended approach, but was the only one available when a piece of equipment decided to develop catastrophic intermittent failure in the middle of a mountain in a snowstorm. He worked with the focused intensity of someone who refuses to accept that a problem is unsolvable, which was a quality Evelyn had noticed in him from the first week, and which she had filed away as the most important thing about him. I have the signal, he said. I have a carrier. It's weak, but it's there. Can they hear us? I think so, maybe. The issue isn't transmission, it's confirmation. I can broadcast, but I can't confirm they're receiving cleanly. He looked at her. Do you want me to try a full report? Yes, full sit rep. Man down, wound status, convoy blocked at crossing, sniper active on Eastern Ridge. Our position has changed. Request extraction window update and request confirmation of ROE status given active threat. ROE. Rules of engagement. They need to confirm we're cleared for active defense given the changed tactical situation. She looked at Volk. Which we already exercised, but I want it on record. Volk said nothing. Daniel began transmitting his voice low and precise, the words careful, and sequenced the way he had been trained to sequence them. Evelyn listened with part of her attention, while the rest of it stayed on the ridgeline, tracking the absence of movement mapping, where the sniper would logically reposition given the new angle he needed. Mason reached out and touched her forearm. She looked at him. Tell me about Ghost, he said. Not the story I half know. The real one. Now. We might have 10 minutes before that sniper finds his spot. You can talk for 10 minutes. She exhaled. She looked at the valley below, still blocked convoy immobile, the lead vehicle's steam rising slowly in the cold air. The sight of it was simultaneously satisfying and surreal. She had done that. She had stopped a 6-vehicle armored convoy with a single shot from a damaged rifle at a distance that most qualified precision shooters would have declined. She was still processing it. I grew up shooting, she said finally. My grandfather taught me. Not sport shooting, practical. Hunting, distance work, wind correction. By the time I got to basic, I could do things with a rifle that made my instructors think the targets were calibrated wrong. A pause. They weren't. When did you get recruited? After my second deployment. A warrant officer named Chen watched me during a range assessment. Didn't say anything during the exercise. After she came up to me and said, "You're wasting your time here, come with me." And that was it. 18 months of training that I'm not going to describe in any detail, and then 3 years of work that I'm also not going to describe. But you were good. I was... She stopped. Restarted. Yes, I was good. I was very good. Good enough that people started using the call sign and it stuck, and I was fine with it because it meant the work was recognized. I wasn't doing it for recognition, but it felt like belonging somewhere. Like a specific kind of belonging that happens when you find the thing your body was built to do. Mason was quiet, listening. And then there was the incident, Evelyn said. The wind shifted. She tracked it automatically, her mind doing the calculation without being asked. Old habits don't die. They just wait. Tell me about the incident, Mason said. You know the version that's in the record. I know the version that was put into the record. That's a different thing. She looked at him. His face was pale, but his eyes were still doing what Mason's eyes always did, which was see things with uncomfortable accuracy. She had been around him for 2 years, and she still hadn't fully adjusted to the experience of being looked at by someone who saw this clearly. There was a patrol, she said. 12 men. Intel said the area was clear. It was not clear. Someone at the authorization level had either failed to update the threat picture or had been working from bad information, I never found out which. The patrol walked into a three-sided contact situation in a village they weren't supposed to have any trouble in. And you were on Overwatch. I was on Overwatch. Solo Overwatch, which is irregular, but the situation was irregular, and the decision was made above my pay grade. She paused. I had eyes on the contact from the moment it developed. I could see what was happening. I could see what was going to happen in approximately the next 90 seconds if nothing changed. And I had the ability to change it. But you didn't have authorization. I did not have authorization. The authorization request was in process. It was sitting on a desk somewhere waiting for a signature that was not coming in time. She said it flatly without bitterness, because the bitterness had been processed a long time ago, and what was left was just the shape of the thing, the clean, hard outline of a decision that had been the right decision and had cost her everything. So I made the call. I engaged without authorization. I saved 12 people. And then I was quietly, efficiently, and completely removed from a role I had spent 8 years building. Mason let out a breath. They said it was about the unauthorized engagement, Evelyn continued. They said it was about protocol, about the precedent it set, about what it would mean if every precision shooter in the field started making independent engagement decisions without authorization. And maybe some of that was real. But also, the officers who were supposed to authorize the action had been slow, and I had been fast, and my being fast made their being slow very visible, and that was inconvenient. So they buried you. They reassigned me, removed the qualification from my record, made me a combat medic, which I am genuinely good at and which I do not resent. The work matters. Every part of it matters. She paused. But it was not my choice. And that's the part I've been living with. The ridgeline moved. She saw it before she consciously registered it. A flicker, a shadow in a place where shadows didn't belong. And she was moving before the thought was fully formed, grabbing Volk's arm and pulling him down and calling Daniel's name, and the shot came in high and wide and hit the rock face above them with a crack like something breaking. He's found his angle, Volk said, already rolling into position. He has elevation on us from that spot. We can't stay here. Evelyn assessed rapidly. How far to the extraction rally point? 300 meters, Daniel said. Across open ground for the last 100. Can we call in smoke? I don't have confirmation command is receiving. Then we may have to make the run without it. She was already calculating Mason's mobility, the sniper's rate of fire, the reload window, the angle of elevation. Volk, if I draw his attention left, can you move Mason? You're talking about exposing yourself. I'm talking about creating a window. 30 seconds. Can you move Mason 30 seconds after I break left? Carter, can you move Mason in that window, yes or no? Volk looked at her. Something in his face had changed since the shot she had made. Something fundamental. The way a piece of furniture in a familiar room gets moved, and afterward, the whole room feels different, even if you can't identify exactly why. Yes, he said. Yes, I can move him. Then that's the plan. That's a bad plan, Mason said. It's the plan we have. Evelyn. Mason's voice was tight. You are not expendable. Nobody said expendable. I said 30 seconds. She checked the sight line to the ridgeline, confirmed the sniper's position, calculated the angle. He's going to be focused on acquiring clean shots. If I move fast enough and unpredictably enough, he'll track me rather than the group. That buys you the window. And what happens to you in the window? I use it to reach the rock formation at the 70-meter mark, which gives me cover and a position from which I can suppress his angle while you complete the move. She looked at him directly. This is not recklessness, Mason. This is mathematics. He stared at her for a moment, with the expression of a man who wants to argue and can see every argument failing before he makes it. Your mathematics are going to give me a stress injury, he said. Add it to my tab. She broke left on 3. She had told herself she would wait for a pause in the wind for a moment of stillness, but there was no such moment, and the mathematics said, go, and she went. She ran in an unpredictable pattern, not the zigzag of panic, but the irregular lateral movement of a trained operator who understands that predictability is what gets you killed, and unpredictability is what gets you to cover. She felt the shot before she heard it, the crack behind her, the impact in the snow close enough that she felt the cold spray of displaced material against her calf. Close. Not close enough. She hit the rock formation and went in hard and stayed low and brought her rifle up and found the ridgeline and fired once twice, suppressing, not expecting to hit, but giving the sniper something to respond to. That wasn't Mason or Volk or Daniel. She heard movement behind her. She kept firing. The sniper went quiet for 7 seconds, not retreating, suppressing, cycling, and in those 7 seconds, she could hear the sound of movement boots on frozen ground, the particular controlled urgency of people moving with purpose under threat. Then Volk's voice in her earpiece. "We're at the secondary. Mason's ambulatory. Okoye is with us. Casualties. Negative." She exhaled. "She bien niemel." The sniper found his angle again. A shot came in and hit the rock above her head, and she felt the impact through the stone and pressed herself flat and waited for the next cycle. "Evelyn." Mason's voice in her ear. Still rough, still bleeding, but present, which was the only thing that mattered. "We're good. Tell me you're good." "I'm good." She tracked the ridge. "I need 30 more seconds of suppression fire. Volk, can you?" "Already on it." And then she heard Volk's rifle from the secondary position, a different angle, and she heard the sniper stop. And in that stopping, she could feel him recalculating, reconfiguring, facing now a two-sided threat problem, where 30 seconds ago, he'd had a single clean point of focus. She moved, not as fast as the first run, but fast enough. She covered the ground and came in behind the secondary position rock and landed beside Daniel, who reached out and steadied her by the shoulder with both hands and said absolutely nothing, which was again the correct response. She was breathing hard. She could feel her heart against her ribs in a way that reminded her she was 36 and not 24, but her hands were steady and her mind was clear, and those were the metrics that mattered. "Mason." She crawled to him, checked the dressing. "How's the pain?" 8, he said. "From 7.5. Movement costs." "It does." She assessed the wound. The dressing was holding, but barely. The run had stressed the tissue, and she could see seepage at the edges. She needed to repack it, which was going to cost him, and she told him so, and he nodded once with his eyes already closed in preparation for what was coming. "Tell me something while you work," he said. "You used that line already." It worked the first time. She found what she needed in the kit and began. "The shot I made," she said, keeping her voice steady and low to give him something to focus on. "The scope was displaced approximately 8 millimeters. I calculated the correction factor based on the mount type and the impact angle. Applied a 22% wind compensation for the sustained gusts and a separate micro adjustment for the gusting. And I held half a breath at the moment of compression." "Did you know it would work?" "I knew the mathematics were right." "That's not what I asked." She paused for a fraction of a second. "No," she said. "I didn't know it would work. I knew it was the only option, and I knew I had to commit to it fully. And I knew that committed imperfect action beats paralyzed perfect calculation every time. So I committed." "That's the most ghost thing you've ever said to me." "I told you to stop using that name." "And I told you it fits. We're both right." She finished repacking the wound. He had done extraordinarily well, barely a sound, just that same controlled physical stillness he brought to everything. The discipline of a man who understood that his body was a tool, and tools had to be managed. She tied off the new layer and patted his shoulder once quickly. "How much longer can you hold this?" she asked. "As long as I need to." Honest answer. He opened his eyes. 40 minutes, maybe 50. After that, the blood loss starts affecting my decision-making, and I stop being useful. "You're not here to be useful. You're here to stay alive." "Those are the same thing." "They're not, Mason." He looked at her, and she looked at him, and in the cold air between them, something passed that didn't require words and didn't get them. Then Daniel's voice cut through from the radio. "Sergeant Carter." His voice was different, not frightened, something else, something that took her another half second to identify, and when she did, she went very still. I have command. Clear signal. They're asking for your name. My name, not Carter. They asked specifically, they said, is that ghost confirm if that's ghost operating? Those were the words. Daniel lowered the radio slightly and looked at her across the small space between them. Someone at command is asking if Ghost just made that shot. The cold moved through her differently then. Not the external cold of the mountain. Something interior. Something that had been locked away for 4 years in a place she had deliberately stopped visiting. Someone new. Someone at command had watched the convoy stop at the crossing and had recognized the shot, recognized the signature of it, the precision and the specific manner of execution, and was now asking whether it was her. Which meant the record they had erased wasn't as buried as she had believed. Which meant something else was happening here, something layered beneath the straightforward mission parameters, something that the 11-minute briefing had not contained. She looked at Volk. He was watching her with an expression she still couldn't fully read. She looked at Mason. Tell them yes, she said. Tell them Ghost confirms. Daniel looked at her for a moment. Then he keyed the radio, and on the other end of a fragile intermittent signal, threading through a mountain snowstorm, something shifted in a room far from the cold and the blood and the blocked convoy, and the consequences of that shift were already in motion, already moving toward them, though none of them could see it yet. The sniper on the eastern ridge fired again. There was no rest on this mountain. There was only what came next. The sniper's shot hit the rock face 2 feet above Volk's head, and the sound of it rolled across the mountain like a door slamming in an empty house. Nobody moved for 3 seconds. Then Evelyn said, "He's bracketing. He doesn't have a clean angle yet. He's testing." "Testing how many shots does it take before one of us panics?" Volk said. "Then don't panic." "I'm not panicking." "Good. Keep not panicking and tell me your ammunition count." Volk ran the check without looking away from the ridgeline. 14 rounds on the primary, 6 on the sidearm. Okoye. 12 on my rifle, 4 on the sidearm. "I have 9, Evelyn said. She had counted during the run. Old habit. "That's enough for sustained suppression for maybe 6 minutes if we're disciplined, and not enough if we're not. So we're going to be disciplined." She looked at Mason. He was propped against the rock, eyes half open, the color in his face, the specific shade of white, that told her his body was working very hard on things that weren't visible. "Mason, I need you to stay awake." "I'm awake. You look like you're negotiating with sleep." "I'm winning the negotiation." A pause. "Barely." "Keep winning." She turned back to the ridgeline. "Volk, the command signal. Did you hear what Okoye said?" "I heard." Someone at command recognized the shot. They knew to ask for Ghost by name. What does that tell you? Volk was quiet for a moment, which was not his natural state, and the fact that he was quiet told her he was actually thinking rather than reacting, which was an improvement. "It tells me someone at command has information about you that isn't in your current service record." "That's what it tells me too." "Who would have that?" "Someone with access to the original records, the ones that got adjusted when I was reassigned." She kept her eyes on the ridge. "Or someone who was there when, 4 years ago, on the patrol." She said it evenly without weight, and then she moved on because the mountain was not interested in her history right now. "We'll figure that out later. Right now we need an extraction window, and we need to keep that sniper from finding his angle. Okoye. When command comes back, I need 2 things. Extraction timeline and the name of whoever flagged the Ghost inquiry." Daniel looked at her. "They'll give me the extraction timeline. They won't give me the second thing." "Ask anyway. The response will tell us something whether they answer or not." He nodded. He understood which was the thing about Daniel Okoye that had nothing to do with his age or his time in the unit. He understood the things underneath the things, which was a skill that most people spent entire careers failing to develop. The radio crackled. Not Daniel's field unit. The command link coming through the rebuilt signal with a clarity that none of them had had for the last 40 minutes. A voicemail flat controlled the voice of someone who had been in operations centers for so long that urgency had become his baseline and calm was just another tactical tool. "Bravo 4, this is Kestrel Actual. Confirm your position and give me a full sit rep. Over." Evelyn took the radio from Daniel. Kestrel Actual, this is Bravo 4. Man down, upper left torso wound packed, stable but declining. Convoy blocked at crossing, primary objective achieved. Active sniper Eastern Ridge. Unknown position count. We are at secondary cover position, 300 meters from extraction rally point, with limited mobility due to casualty. Requesting immediate extraction window. A pause. Then, copy Bravo 4. Extraction window is 40 minutes. Weather is making the approach difficult. We're working it. 40 minutes. She looked at Mason. He caught it in her expression and gave her a small nod that said he had heard, and he understood, and he was still in the negotiation with sleep, and still winning. But 40 minutes was going to require everything he had. Kestrel Actual, she said. I have a secondary request. I need to know the origin of the ghost inquiry. Who flagged that and why? The pause this time was longer. When the voice came back, it had changed. Not the tone, the controlled quality was the same, but something in the texture of it. Something careful. Bravo 4, that information is not available on this channel. Continue your current position and maintain until extraction. Over. Not available or not cleared for this channel. Another pause. Shorter. Both. Over. She handed the radio back to Daniel and looked at Volk. I was watching her with that expression again, the one she still hadn't fully categorized, though she was getting closer. It was the expression of a man revising a significant number of assumptions simultaneously and not finding the process comfortable. Someone's protecting that information, Volk said. Yes. Which means someone at command level knows more about this mission than we were briefed. Yes. That's not a routine extraction hold. No, Evelyn said. It's not. The sniper fired again. This time the angle was different. Not testing. Tighter. He had found something close to a workable position and was beginning to zero in, and Evelyn felt the change in his pattern. The way a musician feels, a key change, not intellectually, but physically, in the rhythm of the intervals. He's establishing a firing solution, she said. We have maybe 5 minutes before he has it clean. 5 minutes to do what? Volk asked. To make a decision. She looked around the position. The rock formation gave them cover on 3 sides, but not the 4th, and the 4th was the direction the sniper was working toward. If we stay, he gets the angle, and we're pinned for 40 minutes with limited ammunition and a man whose blood pressure is dropping. If we move, we cross open ground with a wounded man and a sniper who'll have a partial angle on us for at least 60 of those meters. Those are both bad options, Daniel said. All the good options closed about an hour ago. We're in bad option territory now. She looked at Mason. Can you move? Define move. On your feet, supporting some of your own weight, covering 300 meters. He was quiet for a moment. Honest calculation, not bravado and not surrender. If we're not running, if it's a controlled walk with support on the left side, and if we have suppression fire on that ridge the whole way, yes, that's a significant if collection. You asked me to be honest. I did. She turned to Volk. You're the best shot we have at range right now. She said it without irony and without difficulty, because it was simply true. Can you suppress that ridge position effectively during a 300-meter move? Volk didn't respond to the qualification. He just assessed the tactical question. If I leapfrog, move in intervals, establish new position, cover your movement, move again. Yes, it's not elegant, but it works. Elegant is for people who have 40 minutes and good options. Fair. Okoye. You're on Mason. Left side hand on his belt, you match his pace, and you do not let him go down. She looked at Daniel until he nodded. I'll run right flank. I'll have eyes on the ridge throughout the move. If I see a window, I'll call it. And if the sniper acquires before we're clear? Volk asked. Not challenging. Just the operational question, the one that had to be asked. Then we make ourselves as expensive a target as possible, and we keep moving anyway. She looked around at all 3 of them, Volk, Daniel, Mason, propped against the rock. Any questions? Mason raised one finger slightly. 1. Go ahead. When this is over, and I believe it will be over for the record, I would like to formally request that someone explain to me why we are always the team this happens to. Because we're good, Evelyn said. The universe sends complicated problems to people who can solve them. The universe has terrible judgment. Frequently. She checked her rifle, checked her kit. Did one last assessment of Mason's dressing, holding barely blood at the edges, but not through, and stood up. On my count, 3, 2. The sniper fired, and missed by 8 inches, which told her the angle was closer than she'd estimated, which meant the 5-minute window was a 2-minute window, which meant they were going now, right now. Count abandoned just movement. Go, she said. Go right now. The 100 meters of open ground was the longest 100 meters of her life. She had crossed worse terrain under worse conditions. She knew she had. She had the memories to prove it, but somehow the specific mathematics of this situation, the combination of Mason's slowing movement and the known sniper presence, and the 40-minute extraction window, and the fragile communications link, and the thing. She still hadn't processed about Command's response, the ghost inquiry, the someone knows. Somehow all of it compressed into those 100 meters and made them feel like territory she had never crossed before. Volk was doing exactly what he had said he would do. She could hear him behind and to the left, moving in controlled intervals, establishing firing, moving again. He was methodical and precise, and she revised her assessment of him upward for the 3rd time in the last hour, which was a significant revision given where she'd started. Daniel had Mason. She could see them in her peripheral vision. Daniel with his hand locked on Mason's belt. Mason moving with the grinding, deliberate pace of a man who has told his body, "It is going to do this," and his body has believed him, but is registering the objection with every step. She tracked them, while she tracked the ridge, and managed her own movement, and counted the meters and the seconds simultaneously. 60 meters to the rally point. A shot from the ridge. Wide right. Volk's suppression was working. The sniper couldn't hold a steady aim with return fire coming from a moving position. But working wasn't the same as solved, and she could feel the shooter up there recalibrating, adjusting to the pattern of Volk's movement, learning it the way a good sniper learns everything quietly, completely, and in time to use it. "Volk," she said into the earpiece. "Change your interval rhythm. He's learning your pattern. Copy." A pause. Then his next move came at a different interval, a different distance, and she heard the sniper's next shot go wide in a new direction as he chased a pattern that had just stopped existing. Good. 40 meters. Mason made a sound. It was small, controlled, suppressed. But she heard it because she was listening for it the way she listened for everything on a mountain, which was with her whole body. She looked. He had stumbled. Not fallen. Daniel had caught him, had him was steady. But the stumble told her what she needed to know about the rate of decline. They needed to get him down faster than 40 minutes. She filed that problem in the place where she kept problems she couldn't solve yet and kept moving. 20 meters, 10. The rally point was a natural depression in the terrain not visible from the eastern ridge at this angle, which was why it had been chosen. She reached it first, dropped in, came up with her rifle covering the ridge, and then Daniel was there, and Mason was down. Not collapsed, lowered. Daniel managing the descent with both hands, and then Volk came in last in a controlled sprint that ended with him sliding into the depression with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times. All in, Evelyn said. All in, Volk confirmed. She was already at Mason. His eyes were closed. Mason. She put her hand on his chest, feeling the rise and fall, confirming. He was breathing. Pulse present at the throat, thready, but there. She pushed 2 fingers firmly against his sternum. Mason Reed, open your eyes. They opened, slower than she wanted. Still winning, he said. You're lying. Yes. A faint version of the smile that was his defining expression in better circumstances. But you liked hearing it. She unpacked the kit with hands that were moving faster than she was consciously directing them, which was the muscle memory of 1,000 field interventions, taking over where deliberation was too slow. She needed to address the blood pressure. Drop needed to repack the wound, needed to get fluids into him with what she had available, which was not enough, but was what existed. Talk to me, she said, not for emotional comfort, for consciousness assessment. Tell me something, anything. The mission briefing, Mason said. His voice was slower than it had been 20 minutes ago. Not slurred slower, a different thing but concerning. 11 minutes, you counted. I did. Why do you always count habit? She was working as she talked. When I was in training, the instructors used time as a pressure tool. Everything was timed. You learn to track time without thinking about it. It becomes automatic. 11 minutes, he said again. For a mission this complicated. Yes. That's not enough time. She paused for half a second. Not in her hands kept moving, but in the part of her brain that was tracking the conversation. What do you mean? I've been thinking about it, since before the sniper. Even before that in the briefing, I thought this isn't enough information. The convoy timing, the crossing window, the specific vehicle count. That level of detail for a monitoring assignment. His eyes found hers. Slower than usual, but focused. Someone knew exactly what this convoy was carrying, and they knew it well in advance. Convoy intelligence is sourced from multiple. Evelyn. His voice dropped. Who knew we were going to be at this position? She stopped. She looked at him. Who had the specific coordinates for this observation post? He said. Because the sniper was already moving toward our position when he took the first shot. He wasn't hunting us. He was going to a location. The cold hit her differently then. She had processed the shot as a precision sniper working from an established overwatch point. She had processed the accuracy, the caliber, the fact that it had been a wounding shot rather than a kill shot. She had processed the tactical implications. She had not processed what Mason had just said. The sniper had been moving toward their position, not hunting, arriving. He knew where we were going to be, she said. Before we got there, Mason said. The radio crackled. Bravo 4, this is Kestrel Actual. Extraction timeline has been moved up. We have a window in 22 minutes. Confirm your position at rally point. Evelyn keyed the radio. Confirmed at rally point. 1 casualty ambulatory with support. What's the approach vector? Northern access rotary. Will come in low. Mark your position on confirm. Copy. She lowered the radio and looked at Volk. He had heard everything. His expression was the one she still couldn't fully read, but it was moving, settling, like something coming into focus. If the sniper knew our position before we arrived, he said quietly, then the leak was before the operation. Yes. That means it was in the briefing room. Or before the briefing room, in the planning stage. She looked at him steadily. 4 people were in that briefing with complete position information. Us, and the officer who ran the brief. Volk said nothing. And someone at command just protected the identity of whoever flagged the ghost inquiry, she continued, which is information that shouldn't exist if my record was properly adjusted. Which means someone has been sitting on the original record, sitting on it or using it. Using it how? I don't know yet. She checked Mason's pulse again, slightly stronger. The work she'd done was holding. But I know that the shot I made stopped a convoy that someone very specifically wanted to reach forward positions. And I know that the operation that buried my career 4 years ago involved intelligence failures that were never fully explained. And I know that someone at command just reacted to my name in a way that does not match a routine field operation. Volk was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost the particular quality it had carried since she'd met him. The quality of managed superiority of a man performing confidence as a defensive behavior. What was left underneath it was something more plain and more honest. I didn't know, he said, about your record, about any of it. I want to be clear about that. I know. I've been... He stopped. I haven't been fair in how I've operated with you, in this unit. You've been what you were taught to be by people who gave you incomplete information. She said it without absolution and without accusation. Just fact. That's correctable. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once, short and definitive, the nod of a man who has made a decision he intends to keep. 22 minutes, he said. What do we do about the sniper? He's going to move again. He knows we moved, and he'll be working to reacquire. This position buys us the cover we need for the approach, but only if he doesn't find the angle. She assessed the terrain, the ridge, the vectors. I need to make it difficult for him to find the angle. You're going to draw him again. I'm going to give him a problem that isn't us. She was checking her remaining ammunition. 9 rounds. 8 after the suppression fire. 7 if she needed a margin. There's a secondary rock formation at the 200-meter mark on the eastern slope. If I get there and make noise, actual fire, deliberate exposure for a controlled moment, he'll redirect. He'll have to. It changes his threat picture. That's farther from the extraction point. Yes. You'd need to cover that ground again after. Yes. In the extraction window. I'm aware of this mathematics, Volk. He stared at her. You're going to do it anyway. Someone has to. Mason can't run. Daniel needs to manage Mason. You need to be here for the extraction. You're the only one with enough ammunition left to cover the approach if the sniper gets aggressive. She met his eyes. That leaves me. I don't like this. You don't have to like it. Carter. He said her name the way Mason said it. Not the Volk way, not with the particular tone that carried everything he'd decided about her before he knew her. Just her name, plain as information. Be careful. She almost said something dismissive. Something quick and practical that would close the moment before it became something. Instead, she looked at him for 2 full seconds and said, I will. Then, she was moving. The run to the secondary rock formation was 300 meters of ground she had not walked and could not fully predict, which meant she was reading terrain in real time and adjusting at a rate that demanded everything her body had left. She was cold. Not emergency cold, not yet, but the sustained, deep cold of hours at altitude in winter, and it had been working on her since the beginning. The fine motor cost the slowing of perception at the margins, the way the body starts prioritizing core functions over peripheral ones. She made it in 90 seconds. She went in hard and came up and fired 3 rounds in rapid sequence at the eastern ridge. Not at the sniper, not expecting to hit, but at the rock face near his last estimated position, because the sound and the impact pattern would tell him that there was someone at this location presenting a credible threat, and that threat had to be assessed before the extraction point could be engaged. The response came within 4 seconds. 2 shots fast closed the sniper, tracking her new position with frightening speed. He was good. He had always been good. She had known it from the first shot, from the wounding precision of it, and in another situation she might have appreciated the professionalism. Right now, she appreciated only the rock between her and his angle. She fired twice more. Different points of the ridgeline, making herself feel like a problem. Then she heard something in her earpiece that stopped her heart for exactly 1 beat. Daniel's voice, too fast. Kestrel actual is 7 minutes out, not 22. Weather window opened early. I repeat, extraction in 7 minutes. Carter, we need you at the rally point. 7 minutes. She was 300 meters from the rally point. 300 meters of open ground with a sniper who was now fully oriented toward her position and who would acquire her the moment she broke cover. She ran the numbers. 300 meters at a flat run was roughly 75 seconds for a healthy soldier on good terrain. She was not on good terrain, and she had not been healthy since before the briefing, and she had been running and fighting and carrying weight for hours. Call it 90 seconds, maybe 100. The sniper's reload cycle was approximately 4 seconds. The distance gave him multiple windows. Copy, she said into the radio. On my way. She did not say how she was going to do it. She pressed her back against the rock and thought for exactly 3 seconds, which was all the time she had. There was no clean option. There was the option she had, and the extraction window, and Mason bleeding in the rally point, and that was the whole equation. She thought about the patrol 4 years ago. She thought about the 12 men. She thought about the moment she had made the call. Not the calculation she had calculated 100 times in the years since, but the moment itself, the pure instant of decision when everything else fell away, and there was only the choice and the action. She thought about what Mason had said. Committed imperfect action beats paralyzed perfect calculation every time. She had said that. She had said it, and she had believed it, And she believed it now. She broke right. She ran. The first shot came at the 30-meter mark. Wide. He was leading her, tracking her, speed adjusting. She changed her pace, not her direction. She couldn't afford the lateral movement on this terrain. She needed every meter to be a forward meter. But her pace irregular, unpredictable, fast, then faster, then a sudden deceleration as she read the ground ahead. The second shot came at 90 meters. Closer. Close enough that she felt the air move. She did not stop. The third shot came at 150 meters, and she heard it differently. Heard the crack, and then the impact behind her, and she didn't know if he had missed intentionally or had genuinely miscalculated, but she was not going to stop to find out. 100 meters left. She could hear the rotary. Not close yet, but present, that specific bass frequency of a heavy helicopter working through mountain air, distinct from everything else, the most specific sound in the world when you need it. She locked onto it and ran. Volk's rifle opened up from the rally point. He had eyes on her and eyes on the ridge, and he was providing cover at a rate that told her he had stopped being careful with his remaining rounds and had made a decision about what mattered more than ammunition conservation. She covered the last 100 meters in 43 seconds. She came in over the edge of the depression and landed hard, and Volk caught her by the arm and held her up for the 2 seconds her legs needed to decide to keep working, and she was breathing in huge, tearing gasps that she couldn't smooth into something manageable yet. "Helicopter is 2 minutes, Daniel said. "Mason," she got out. "Here," Mason said. His voice was smaller than it had been, but present. She pulled herself to him, checked his pulse, checked his color, did the assessment in 15 seconds because 15 seconds was all she had. "He needs the hospital in the next 30 minutes, she said to Volk. Not a question. A statement for the record. "He'll have it," Volk said. "Kestrel gave me the receiving facility, 12 minutes from our extraction point. Good." She had her hand on Mason's face, tilted his head slightly, checked his pupils. "Mason, helicopter is 2 minutes. You're going to be in surgery in 45 minutes. You hear me?" "I hear you." His voice slow. "Did you get back in one piece? Functional piece. That's not the same thing." "Close enough." She kept her hand against his face, steady, warm, or as warm as she could make it. "Stay with me 2 more minutes." "I can do 2 minutes." The helicopter was louder now. She could feel it in the air. And then Daniel said, and his voice had gone to that same register it had found earlier, the one underneath urgency, the one she had learned meant something layered was happening. "Sergeant Carter, Kestrel Actual is asking for you specifically on approach confirmation, not the team, you." She looked up. "They're saying your presence needs to be confirmed for the extraction to proceed." Daniel's eyes were very still, very clear. "They're asking a command-level officer to verify, those are the words, to verify that Ghost is in fact on action." The sniper on the eastern ridge had gone silent. Not repositioning. Gone. As if someone had told him to stop. She felt the full weight of that silence land on her, felt it connect to everything Mason had said about the sniper arriving instead of hunting, felt it connect to the Ghost inquiry, the protected information, the command response, the 11-minute briefing, the 2 specific intelligence on the convoy. Something was very wrong. Something had been wrong before any of them stepped onto this mountain. And whatever it was waiting for her at the bottom. "Tell them Ghost confirms," she said. "Tell them I'm here." The helicopter broke through the cloud cover. She kept her hand on Mason's face. 2 minutes. She had already decided she would not waste them on fear. The helicopter landed hard and fast, the way military extractions always do when the window is tight and the crew has been told not to linger. The door came open, and 2 medics were already out before the skids fully settled, moving toward Mason, with the practiced urgency of people who had been briefed on the casualty and didn't need to ask questions. Evelyn stepped back and let them work. That was the hardest thing she had done all day. Harder than the shot, harder than the run, harder than the suppression fire in open ground with a sniper tracking her. Stepping back from Mason and letting someone else's hands take over, that required a specific kind of trust that didn't come naturally to her, that she had to choose deliberately, and she chose it now because she knew what she was and she knew what they were. and Mason needed the second set of hands more than he needed her to stay close. She watched them stabilize him for transport. She watched his face. His eyes were closed, but his chest was moving in the right rhythm, and she had done everything she could do with what she had, and now it was someone else's turn, and she had to be all right with that. She was all right with that. Volk appeared at her shoulder. "He'll make it." "I know." "You don't sound like you know." "I know it factually. I'm still processing it emotionally. Those are different timelines." She turned away from Mason and looked at the crew chief standing at the helicopter door. "Who's running this extraction?" "Chief Warrant Officer Delgado, ma'am. You're Carter." "Yes." He handed her a sealed envelope. Physical paper, which meant this was information someone had decided not to transmit electronically. She looked at it for a moment before she opened it because the weight of it in her hand was telling her something before she read a word. Inside was a single printed page. No letterhead, no signature block, just a name, a rank, and 3 sentences. She read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in her jacket pocket and looked at the mountain they were leaving and said nothing for 12 seconds. "Carter." Volk's voice was careful. "What is it?" "Get on the helicopter," she said. "I'll tell you when we're in the air." The flight to base took 19 minutes. Mason went directly into surgery upon arrival. She stood at the receiving bay long enough to confirm the handoff, long enough to hear the surgical team confirm his vitals as serious but stable, and then she made herself walk away because there was nothing she could do in a surgical waiting room that would help him, and there was apparently a great deal she was expected to do elsewhere. An escort was waiting for her. Not a standard debrief escort. 2 officers, neither of whom she recognized, with the specific posture of people who had been sent rather than assigned, which was a meaningful distinction. They walked her through corridors she had been through before and into a section of the base she had not, which was an administrative block she had always understood to contain logistics and personnel management. She had been wrong about what was in there. The room they brought her to was not large. 4 people were already inside. A full colonel she didn't know. A JAG officer. A civilian in a gray jacket whose presence in a military facility at this hour meant something she hadn't figured out yet. And a woman she recognized immediately, despite not having seen her face in 4 years. Warrant Officer Chen, older. Something in her posture that was different, not tired exactly, but weighted in the way of someone who has been carrying something for a long time and has finally decided to put it down. She was the one who had recruited Evelyn, who had watched her on a range and said, "Come with me," who had run the 18 months of training that had built Ghost from the raw material of a soldier who happened to be extraordinary into something precise and operational and named. Chin looked at her across the room. Evelyn looked back. Neither of them said anything for a moment. The colonel spoke first. "Staff Sergeant Carter, thank you for coming. I wasn't given a choice. You were given an escort. That's not the same thing." He gestured to a chair, and she sat, not because she wanted to, but because standing was going to become complicated, and she had been on a mountain for 8 hours, and her legs were registering their professional objections. "I'm Colonel Hargrove. This is Captain Yi from JAG. Mr. Solis is here as an observer from the Office of the Inspector General, and I believe you know Warrant Officer Chen." "I know her," Chen said. "I'm sorry for the circumstances." "Which circumstances specifically?" "All of them." Chen's voice was direct and undecorated, which was how it had always been. It was one of the things Evelyn had respected about her from the beginning. "The mission today, the way we brought you in, the last 4 years." A pause. "All of it." Evelyn put her hands flat on the table and looked at Hargrove. "The envelope that Delgado gave me on extraction. A name and 3 sentences. I want to know what those 3 sentences mean." Hargrove exchanged a glance with Captain Yi. "What did the note say from your reading?" "It said that the investigation into my reassignment 4 years ago has been reopened. It said that new evidence has emerged, suggesting the original review was conducted with incomplete, that was the word, incomplete information. And it said that the officer who recommended my disqualification has been removed from his current posting, pending further review." She kept her voice level. "What I want to know is what changed. 4 years is a long time for something to go from buried to reopened. Hargrove looked at Chen. Chen looked at Evelyn. Today's mission changed it, she said. The shot you made. My shot stopped a convoy. That's a tactical outcome. How does a tactical outcome reopen a 4-year-old personnel action? Because the convoy wasn't just any convoy. Chen leaned forward slightly. The command equipment in the lead vehicle. The reason it was the priority target included encrypted communications hardware that we've been tracking for 7 months. Hardware that has been used to pass information out of forward operational planning to third-party recipients. Evelyn processed that. Someone has been leaking operational intelligence, she said. Yes. Through that hardware. And through a communications node that we traced back through 3 relays over the past 4 months. Chen's hands were very still on the table. When the lead vehicle was stopped, the hardware was locked. It couldn't be moved, couldn't be zeroed remotely, because the vehicle was immobilized at the crossing. Our technical team was on site within 2 hours. We recovered the hardware intact. And the hardware told you something. The hardware told us a great deal, including traffic from the past 18 months. A pause. Including traffic that referenced the operation 4 years ago, the one that cost you your qualification. The room went very quiet. Evelyn heard her own breathing, heard the ventilation system in the ceiling, heard somewhere down the corridor a door closing someone's boots, the ordinary sounds of a base that had no idea what was happening in this room right now. It wasn't bad intelligence, she said, not a question. No. The patrol walked into that contact because someone told the other side they were coming. Yes. She looked at the ceiling for 2 seconds. Then she looked back at Chen. And the review board, the one that removed my qualification, was conducted by an officer who had access to the same communications channel. Chen's voice was steady and very deliberate, the voice of someone who has rehearsed this conversation many times and is finally after 4 years having it. We don't know yet whether he was aware of the leak or whether he was used as a tool by someone above him. That's what the IG review will determine. A nod toward Solis, who had been silent throughout and remained silent now, just watching with the neutral attention of a man whose job is to observe and record. What we do know is that your disqualification was procedurally irregular. The review board was convened faster than protocol required with fewer members than regulation specified, and the officer who initiated it had a documented interest in suppressing the record of what happened on that patrol, because the record showed that the contact happened because of a leak. Yes, and the records showed that your unauthorized engagement, the action that drew the review, saved 12 people from a contact that should never have happened, which meant that if your action was examined closely, the patrol itself would be examined closely, and the intelligence failure that created the contact would be examined closely, and someone didn't want that examined. No, Chin said. Someone very much did not. Captain Yi spoke for the first time. He had the careful voice of a lawyer who understood that every word he said was a potential document. Staff Sergeant Carter, I want to be precise about where we are legally and procedurally. The review that removed your precision shooter qualification has been suspended pending reinvestigation. That means the qualification is currently in a status of contested record. It has not been formally restored, but it has not been upheld. The investigation will determine the outcome, and based on what we recovered today, the JAG office's assessment is that the original review will be found to have been procedurally invalid. How long does that take? The formal reinvestigation, 60 to 90 days under standard protocol. Given the IG involvement and the classification level of the recovered communications, it may be expedited, but I can't promise a timeline. 60 to 90 days, she said. She said it without visible emotion, which required effort because 60 to 90 days was simultaneously the shortest time this process had ever moved, and an amount of time that carried the weight of 4 years behind it. I understand that's... What about the mission today? She asked. The engagement I made without current authorization. I'm not on the precision shooter qualification rolls. I fired a weapon in a combat engagement in a role I am not officially qualified for. What's the status of that action? Yi looked at Hargrove. Hargrove answered. The engagement has been reviewed by 2 operational commanders in the past 3 hours. The assessment is that the action fell within the authorized defensive use parameters given the changed threat picture. Your team was under active fire. The primary weapon was disabled. You were the ranking functional operator in the field. A pause. The engagement has been classified as operationally justified, and the question of whether I had the skill to make that shot at that distance with that weapon in those conditions without a current qualification. The shot speaks for itself, Hargrove said. She looked at him for a moment. He was in his late 50s, the kind of face that had been serious for so long, it had settled into that as a default setting. But there was something in his eyes that was not entirely bureaucratic. Something that recognized what he was sitting across from. "Sergeant," he said, and his voice dropped 1 register into something more plain. "What you did on that mountain today, the shot, the field medicine, the tactical decisions under fire. I've read the preliminary report. I've looked at the scope displacement data your team relayed, and the crosswind calculations, and the distance. I've been in this work for 31 years. He stopped. I've never seen a documented field engagement quite like it. She said nothing. That's not flattery, he said. That's a factual statement that I expect will be included in the reinvestigation record. Good, she said. Put it in the record. Chen walked her out. Not to a debriefing room, not to another escort, just out into the corridor, walking beside her. The way she had walked beside her a long time ago in a training facility that existed under a different name. In a file Evelyn had not been allowed to keep. I should have fought harder, Chen said. 4 years ago, when the review was convened, I raised the procedural objections, and they were overruled, and I made the calculation that pushing further would close more doors than it opened. And I have not been at peace with that calculation since. You didn't make the call that buried the record. No, but I didn't unmake it either. A pause. I've been building the case for 14 months, quietly, using what I could find without triggering scrutiny from the people I was building it against. Today was... She stopped walking. Today was the piece I didn't expect, the hardware recovery. That was the piece I couldn't manufacture and couldn't predict. Your shot gave us the evidence that the review was connected to something much larger than a personnel action. Evelyn stopped too and turned to face her. The sniper, she said. He knew our position before we arrived. Chen's expression changed, just slightly. What makes you say that? Mason. He noticed the shot pattern wounding not lethal at a distance and angle that should have been a kill shot. And the sniper's initial movement suggested he was arriving at a location rather than hunting us to one. She watched Chen's face. You knew. We suspected. How long? 3 weeks. We had signals intelligence suggesting the operation parameters had been accessed by someone outside the authorized chain. We couldn't confirm it without running the operation anyway and seeing what happened. Evelyn's voice was very flat. You ran the mission knowing there was a possible leak, knowing we might be walking into a compromised position. We ran the mission because the hardware was moving and the window was closing, and if we waited for certainty, we would lose the only opportunity to recover it. And because... Chen stopped, started again. And because the assessment was that the team could manage the threat picture even if the position was partially compromised. The assessment was wrong. Mason is in surgery. I know. Your assessment put my teammate in surgery. I know that, Evelyn. Chen's voice went to the place underneath her usual register, the place that didn't have armor on it. I know exactly what the assessment cost, and I will carry that. The silence between them had texture. It had the specific weight of 2 people who respected each other and were currently in direct conflict about something that mattered enormously and could not be quickly resolved. Evelyn spoke first. Was I specifically chosen for this team, for this mission? Chin held her gaze. Yes. Because Ghost was needed for the shot. Because if the position was compromised and the primary weapon was neutralized, which we assessed as a significant possibility, given the leak we needed someone on that team who could still complete the primary objective. A pause that cost her something. And because if Ghost made the shot, it created a documented field record, that directly contradicted the original review board's finding that your qualification had been appropriately removed. The full shape of it assembled in Evelyn's mind. She had been placed on the mission as a combat medic. She had been placed there with the expectation that the mission would go wrong in a specific way. And when it went wrong in that specific way, she had done exactly what she had been assessed as capable of doing. And the doing of it had created a record that served the investigation that Chen had been quietly building for 14 months. She had been a piece, a very precisely chosen piece. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then, "Did you think about telling me?" "Yes." And the conclusion was that if you knew, you might make different decisions. Decisions that protected the investigation rather than the mission. And the mission had to come first. Chen's voice was very quiet. The lives on that mountain had to come first, even above the strategy. Mason's life almost didn't come first. "I know." Chen didn't look away. "I know, and there is no answer I can give you that makes that acceptable. I made the best call I could with the information and the constraints I had, and it cost more than I wanted it to cost, and I would make the same call again, and I understand if that is something you cannot forgive." Evelyn looked at her for a long time. She thought about 12 men on a patrol 4 years ago. She thought about the authorization that hadn't come in time. She thought about the specific moment she had made the call. Not the calculation, the moment, and what it had cost her, and why she had never once regretted the decision itself, only the consequences. She thought about the difference between a decision and its cost. She thought about how those were separate things that people persistently tried to combine. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "whether I forgive it. Ask me in 60 to 90 days. Chen almost smiled. "Fair." She went to the surgical waiting area and sat down and did not move for 40 minutes. At the 41-minute mark, a surgeon came out and told her Mason was out of the procedure and stable, and that barring complications, he would have full mobility within 6 to 8 weeks, and that the blood loss had been significant, but not critical, thanks to field management that the surgical team had described as exceptionally thorough. She said thank you in a voice that came out more unsteady than she intended. The surgeon, who had clearly seen family members receive this news before, gave her exactly the right amount of space and then left. She put her face in her hands for 30 seconds. Not crying. Just being somewhere private in a public place, which is a skill you develop in the military out of pure necessity. The ability to fold yourself inward for a moment when the moment demands it. Then she straightened up and looked at the wall. Volk appeared from somewhere to her left and sat down next to her without saying anything. He had cleaned up, changed his jacket, looked like a person who had been on a mountain and was now off it, which was exactly what she looked like too. He sat with her in silence for 2 full minutes. Then, "How bad is it, the rest of it? Not Mason, the other thing." She considered what to tell him. Decided on the truth because they had been through something together on that mountain that had changed the accounting between them, and she owed him accuracy. She laid it out. Chen, the hardware, the leaked intelligence, the 4-year-old review, and what it was connected to the fact that their position had been compromised before they stepped onto the mountain. Volk listened without interrupting, which told her that whatever had shifted in him during the last several hours was still shifting and had not reached a stop point yet. When she finished, he said, "Someone in our chain sold that position." "Yes." "And the convoy was the evidence that could trace it back." "Yes." "And the shot you made stopping the convoy, that's what recovered the evidence." "Apparently." Howe was quiet for a moment. "So if you hadn't made that shot, if the convoy had gotten through, the hardware would have been zeroed at a forward position and the evidence would have been gone. And whoever leaked our coordinates would have walked away clean." "Yes." "And Mason would have been wounded for nothing." His voice went to a place she hadn't heard from him before. Not the managed confidence, not the performance. Something underneath all of it that was just genuine human anger, the kind that comes not from pride, but from caring about something. He bled on that mountain for a mission that someone was trying to sabotage from the inside. "Yes," she said. "He did." That's Volk stopped, started again. "That's not something I know how to sit with." "You learn," she said. It takes time, but you learn. He looked at her with an expression that was no longer the one she'd been cataloging all day. This one she recognized cleanly. It was the look of a person encountering the full depth of something they had only seen the surface of before. How long have you been carrying this, the 4 years of it? Knowing what really happened and not being able to say it? Long enough that the weight became normal. She paused. Which is both an adaptation and a warning sign. When the weight becomes normal, you stop noticing it's there. And then one day, you're on a mountain with a broken scope, and 90 seconds, and you realize you've been carrying it so long, it's just part of how you stand. Volk nodded slowly. Then Daniel Okoye came around the corner still in his field jacket and stopped when he saw them and said, "He's stable." "Stable," Evelyn confirmed. Daniel sat down on Evelyn's other side without being invited and without asking which was exactly right. The three of them sat in the corridor outside a surgical unit in a military hospital and said nothing for a while. Then Daniel said, "Someone's going to want to debrief me about the radio." "They'll want to debrief all of us." "How long will that take?" "Days, probably. Given the IG involvement and what was recovered, the debrief process will be extensive." Daniel absorbed this. "Can I ask something?" "Go ahead." "The person. The one who leaked our position." He was choosing his words carefully, the way young people do when they're trying to talk about something heavy without sounding naive. "Do they know yet that the hardware was recovered, that you made that shot?" "I would assume so." "Then they know the evidence exists?" "Yes." "Which means—" He stopped. "Which means the next several days are going to be complicated," Evelyn said. "People who have something to lose tend to get active when they see the wall coming. Yes, I'm aware of that." Daniel looked at her. "Are you scared?" She thought about it genuinely, which was the only way she knew how to answer honest questions. "No," she said. "I've been scared before. On the mountain at different moments there was fear. Real fear." She paused. "This is different. This feels more like being in position. Like I'm finally standing somewhere I can see from. After 4 years of not having the angle." "And the shot?" Daniel asked. He wasn't talking about the convoy. She could hear it in the way he said it. He was talking about what came next. The investigation. The record. Whatever was building in the rooms she hadn't walked into yet. "I'll take it," she said. "When the time comes, I'll take it." Hargrove found her at 2200 hours. She was still in the corridor. Volk had left an hour ago. Daniel had fallen asleep in a chair 40 meters away, head-back jacket pulled up, the deep, unconscious sleep of someone whose body had simply closed the account for the day. She didn't have the heart to wake him. Hargrove sat down where Volk had been. "Chen told you the full picture," he said. "It was not a question." "She did. I want to be direct with you about something that isn't in any of the formal documentation yet." He looked at his hands for a moment, then at her. "The officer who ran your original review board, Major Aldrich Strand, he resigned his posting this afternoon, before we formally notified him of the reinvestigation." She went still. "He resigned, and he retained legal counsel within 4 hours of the hardware recovery." Hargrove continued. "Which tells us he was monitoring for the outcome of this mission. He had someone telling him what happened on that mountain today. He knew about the convoy stop before we filed any official report. He has someone inside the current operational chain," she said. "We believe so, which is why the next phase of this moves carefully and quickly." He paused. "I'm telling you this because you are a person in this situation who deserves to know the scope of what you walked into today. Not all of it. Some of it is classification above this conversation, but enough. What do you need from me? Your full debrief, which you'll give tomorrow. Your formal testimony on the field engagement and the tactical sequence. And," he stopped, "I need to ask you something directly. Ask. When Chen told you that you were specifically selected for this mission, that your presence was intentional, that the expectation was you would need to perform as Ghost." He looked at her with the direct, unceremonious attention of a man who had been in long enough to dispense with diplomatic framing. "What is your honest reaction to that?" She thought about it for the length of time it deserved. I was used, she said. That's the honest reaction. I was a tool in an operation I didn't have full knowledge of, and I was placed in a situation designed to extract a specific output from me. A pause. And the output mattered. The evidence is real. The leak is real. The harm it caused to my team, to the 12 men 4 years ago, to everyone whose mission data was sold to people who used it, that's all real. And the shot was the key to recovering the evidence. Another pause. So I can hold both things. I can understand why the decision was made, and I can still think it should have been made differently. Both of those can be true. Hargrove was quiet for a moment. You're more measured about this than most people would be. I've had 4 years of practice at being measured about things I was angry about. He nodded. He looked like he was going to say something else and then didn't, and she respected that, the discipline of not filling silence with words that weren't needed. He stood to go. "Colonel," she said. He stopped. "Mason Reed," she said. "When this is over, when the reinvestigation concludes, I want his contribution documented." He saw what the sniper's shot pattern meant before I did. Without that observation, I would have treated the engagement as a conventional sniper threat, and I might have made different decisions. He was wounded and bleeding and still doing his job. I want that in the record. Hargrove looked at her for a moment. "It will be in the record," he said. He left. She sat alone in the corridor and listened to the ordinary sounds of a base at night, and somewhere down the hall, Daniel Okoye was asleep in a chair, and somewhere beyond a set of double doors, Mason Reed was in a recovery room, breathing steadily with a repaired left side, and somewhere in a room she hadn't been to and wouldn't be tonight. People were looking at hardware recovered from a vehicle she had stopped with a single shot at a distance, and in conditions that the formal report would probably describe in language that was accurate, but would not quite capture what it had actually felt like. She had not asked to be here. She had not asked for the 4 years, for the reassignment, for the weight that had become normal. But she was here. She was exactly here. And for the first time in a very long time, standing in this specific place felt less like exile and more like arrival. She closed her eyes. Tomorrow, there would be debriefs and documentation, and the formal beginning of a process that would take 60 to 90 days and would cost her something she hadn't anticipated yet, because these things always did. Tomorrow, Strand's lawyers would file something, and the IG would request something, and Hargrove would need something from her that would be harder to give than the shot had been. Tomorrow was a great deal of things. Tonight, Mason was breathing. That was enough. The debrief lasted 3 days. Not 3 sessions. 3 full days with breaks only long enough to sleep and eat and return to the same room with the same faces and the same recorder running and the same questions asked from different angles, the way investigators do when they're not doubting your answers, but building a structure that has to hold weight from every direction. She answered everything. She answered the tactical sequence question by question, from the moment the helicopter landed on the mountain to the moment the extraction helicopter lifted off. She answered the communications log discrepancies. She answered the questions about her field, medical decisions, her engagement decision, her scope, compensation calculation, which the technical team had reconstructed from the shot data and confirmed with the kind of language that made the JAG officer look up from his notes for the first time in 2 hours. On the second day, they asked her about Ghost. Not the call sign, not the operational history. The question was specific and came from the IG investigator Solis, who had been silent in every room until now, and who spoke with the deliberate precision of someone who understood that the words he chose in an official proceeding became permanent. Staff Sergeant Carter, in your assessment, was your precision shooter capability relevant to your assignment to this specific mission? She looked at him for a moment. Yes, she said. And did you have reason to believe prior to the operation that your capability would be required beyond your documented medic role? No. But it was required. Yes. And you exercised it? Yes. Under what authority? She had thought about this answer for 2 days. Not rehearsed it, thought about it, which is different. Under the authority of the situation, she said. My primary shooter was incapacitated by a weapon jam. My teammate was wounded. The mission objective was 30 seconds from being lost. I had the capability to address the situation, and I used it. A pause. I would make the same decision again. Solis wrote something. Chin, sitting across the table, did not change her expression, but something in her posture shifted by a degree that only someone who had trained under her would notice. Evelyn noticed. "One more question," Solis said. "The original review board that removed your precision qualification. In your current assessment, knowing what you know now about the circumstances of that board, do you believe the outcome was procedurally sound?" The room was very quiet. "No," she said. "I don't." He wrote something else. And then for the first time in 3 days, he closed his notebook and looked at her directly and said, "Thank you, Staff Sergeant. That's all I need from you." Mason was sitting up when she came to see him on the afternoon of the 3rd day. Sitting up and complaining, which she took as an excellent sign. The complaints were specific and delivered with the precise vocabulary of a man who has been dealing with medical professionals for 72 hours and has opinions about the experience. He was complaining about the food, about the angle of the bed, about the fact that nobody would give him a straight answer about his return-to-duty timeline. She sat in the chair next to his bed and let him complain until he ran out of complaints, which took 4 minutes, and then he looked at her and said, "Well, stable," she said. "Not me. I know I'm stable. I just said 17 things that are wrong with my current situation. I mean the rest of it. The debrief is complete. The IG is building the formal case. Strand's lawyers filed a motion yesterday that the JAG office is describing as aggressive and unpersuasive." She looked at her hands. Chen testified for 6 hours on the 2nd day. I don't know everything she said, but I know it was complete because Hargrove came out of that session looking like a man who had just had a significant number of things confirmed. "And your qualification, still in contested status. The formal reinvestigation takes 60 to 90 days, you told me. I remember." He adjusted, slightly winced in a way he tried to conceal and failed because she was watching for it. "That's not what I asked. I asked about your qualification, not the paperwork timeline. You." She understood the distinction. "I'm all right. That's also not what I asked." She looked at him. "You want to know how I'm doing with the fact that it's real now. That it's not just something I've been carrying privately. It's a formal proceeding. It's documented. There are other people's names on it and official language around it, and it's moving through a system that is going to produce an outcome I don't control." "Yes," he said. "That's what I want to know." She was quiet for a moment. Outside the room, she could hear the ordinary noise of a medical ward movement, voices, equipment, the specific rhythm of a place that runs continuously, regardless of what any individual inside it is going through. "It's strange," she said finally. "I thought I wanted this for 4 years. The record corrected the review, invalidated the qualification, restored. I thought that was the thing I needed." A pause. "Now that it's happening, what I mostly feel is tired." "That's not strange. That's normal." "Is it? You've been fighting a thing invisibly for 4 years. Now the fight is visible. You switched from carrying it alone to carrying it in public, and that's not lighter, it's heavier in a different way." He shifted again, and this time she could see him managing the pain in real time, the way he always managed things directly without drama. With the functional discipline of a man who understands his body, is sending him important information, and he can acknowledge it without being controlled by it. "What does it feel like on the mountain when you made the shot?" "You already asked me that." "On the mountain you told me the mathematics. I'm asking now, 3 days later, what it felt like." She thought about it. Really thought about it the way she did with Mason's honest questions, gave them the time they deserved, rather than deflecting with competence. "Like coming home to a house I'd been locked out of," she said. "The scope was broken and the wind was wrong and my hands were frozen, and I was afraid, genuinely afraid, not of dying, but of missing. Of being in the moment I'd been built for, and not being equal to it." A pause. "And then I breathed. And everything that had been taken apart got quiet. And I knew the answer. I knew the correction factor, and the wind compensation, and the trajectory, and I knew them the way you know things that are in your body, rather than your head. And I fired." She looked at the wall for a moment. And then I waited to find out if I was right. Mason was watching her with the expression she had cataloged across 2 years and a mountain and 3 days of something that had changed the accounting between them permanently. "You were right," he said. "I was right." "You're always right." "I'm often right about mathematics. I'm frequently wrong about other things." "Name one." "I thought the weight would become manageable if I just kept moving forward and didn't look at it directly." She looked at him. "I was wrong about that. The weight doesn't become manageable by being ignored. It becomes manageable by being accurate about what it actually is." He nodded slowly. "What is it actually?" "Loss," she said. 4 years of loss. The work, the identity, the belonging I told you about. The specific belonging of being in the thing you were built for. That doesn't not hurt just because the circumstances were unjust. Loss is loss, regardless of who caused it." She paused. "But it's also recoverable." That's the part I didn't let myself believe for a long time. That it was recoverable. That Ghost wasn't gone, she was just in a place I'd stopped allowing myself to visit. Mason said, "She was never gone." I know that now. "You knew it on the mountain." "I knew it the moment I picked up the rifle." She almost smiled. "And then I was too busy doing mathematics to think about it." He laughed short, carefully managed because of the left side, but genuine. "That's the most you thing you have ever said." On the morning of the 4th day, Daniel Okoye knocked on her door at the temporary quarters block. He was holding 2 cups of coffee that he had clearly carried across a significant distance, with very careful attention to not spilling them, which told her the gesture had been deliberate, and thought about which told her this was not a casual visit. She took the coffee and stepped back, and he came in and stood with the particular posture of a young person who has something important to say and is organizing his approach to it. "Sit down, Okoye." He sat. She sat. He held his coffee with both hands and looked at the floor for a moment, and then looked at her. "I've been thinking about the radio," he said. "The radio worked. You made it work under conditions that should have broken it permanently. I know, that's not—" He stopped. "When you were out there, on the 300-meter run drawing the sniper, I was watching you from the rally point. I had Mason on one side, and I had eyes on you, and I had the radio in my hand, and I was trying to reach command for updated extraction information, and—" He stopped again. "I was scared. I was genuinely, completely scared." "Yes. And I did my job anyway." "Yes, you did. I just—" He looked at his coffee. "I wanted to tell someone that I was scared and I did it anyway. I don't know why that felt important to say." She looked at him for a moment. He was 23 years old, and he had been on a mountain in a winter storm with a sniper and a wounded teammate and fragmented communications, and had done every single thing that was asked of him, and some things that weren't asked, and now he was sitting in her quarters holding coffee and processing what that meant. She remembered being that age, more or less. She remembered the specific texture of that particular revelation, that fear and function could coexist, that they were not mutually exclusive, that the presence of one did not disqualify the other. "That's what courage is," she said. "Exactly that. Not the absence of fear, the presence of it and moving anyway." She paused. "You should know that. You should carry that with you because you've earned the right to understand it from the inside." He looked up. His face was doing something complicated and young and honest. "I keep thinking about what you said. To Mason. That the universe sends complicated problems to the people who can solve them." I said the universe has terrible judgment, right after that. I believe both things simultaneously. He almost smiled. "I think I'm going to be okay." "I know you are," she said. "I knew it the first week you were in this unit. You have the thing that can't be trained into people, the specific quality of someone who runs toward the problem when the problem gets big. Not because they're not afraid, but because they understand somehow that the problem needs them more than they need the comfort of staying back." I was quiet for a moment. "Sergeant Carter." "Evelyn." He looked slightly startled, then adjusted. "Evelyn. When this is all over, the investigation, the reinstatement, what do you want?" She thought about it. It was a simple question with a complicated answer, and she gave it the honest time it deserved, rather than the quick deflection of someone who has spent 4 years not being allowed to want things directly. "I want to go back to work," she said. "Both kinds of work. I want the medic kit and the rifle. I want to be the person who can save the life and stop the threat, because those are not opposite things, and they never were. I was told they were incompatible, but that was a lie told by people who needed a simpler story than the truth." She paused. "I want Mason on my left, and a mission that matters, and a team I can trust. That's what I want." Daniel nodded. He looked like someone who had come for a reason and found more than he expected. "I think you're going to get it," he said. "I think so too." He stood up, finished his coffee in one decisive movement and said, "The coffee was from the good machine, not the ward machine. I found it yesterday. It matters." "It does matter," she agreed. "Thank you." He left. She drank the coffee, and it was in fact significantly better than the ward machine, and she sat with that small and ordinary fact for a moment and let it be what it was. A young soldier finding the good coffee and bringing it to someone, which was an entirely human thing, entirely unmilitary, entirely real. Volk came on the 5th day. He didn't knock so much as appear in her doorway with the expression of a man who has rehearsed something and is now reconsidering the rehearsal. She recognized the expression because she'd had it herself on several occasions, and she did him the courtesy of not making him stand there longer than necessary. "Come in," she said. He came in and stood, the way he always stood, precise, self-contained, but it had a different quality now, the containment. Less like armor, more like posture. "I have orders," he said. "Reassignment. Different unit, different operational area. I leave in 8 days. I heard. I wanted to say something before I go." He looked at her steadily. "I was wrong about you. Not just operationally, the capability assessment, the skill level, all of that. I was wrong about who you were. I had assembled a version of you from assumptions and convenience, and the fact that you never pushed back on any of it, which I mistook for confirmation." He paused. The not pushing back wasn't confirmation. It was discipline. "That's a distinction I should have understood and didn't." She waited. "On the mountain," he said, "you made a shot that I don't know if I could have made with my own fully calibrated weapon and optimal conditions. You made it with a damaged scope and frozen hands and a wounded man next to you asking you questions while you worked. And then you got up and ran suppression patterns for your team and came back and repacked the wound and managed the extraction and handled everything that came after." He stopped. "I watched all of that. I've been thinking about all of that for 5 days. And I think I've been in this work for 10 years, and I've been measuring people by the wrong things." His voice was plain now, stripped of the performed quality it usually carried. "I've been measuring people by what's in their record, and what their designations say, and who's endorsed them, and who hasn't. And I completely missed what was right in front of me. Which is that the most capable soldier I have ever operated with was classified as a combat medic because someone needed her to be invisible." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "Your record was wrong," Volk said. "The record said one thing, and the reality was something else entirely. And I read the record and stopped there." A pause. "I won't do that again. That's what I came to say." "Okay," she said. He blinked. "Okay. I believe you. The acknowledgement is noted and accepted." She looked at him. "You covered my run on that mountain. You used your last rounds providing suppression when you could have conserved them. You moved Mason when I needed you to, and you held the extraction position under fire." A pause. "That matters more than what happened before it. The record of the mountain is what I'll keep." He looked at her for a moment, with an expression that was the closest thing to raw she had seen on his face. "Thank you." "Good luck with the new unit," she said. "They're getting someone who's been in bad option territory and figured out how to navigate it. That's worth something." He nodded. He put out his hand and she shook it, which was a plain and complete transaction, and then he was gone. The formal finding came on day 67, not 60 to 90. 67, which was expedited, which was Hargrove's word to her when he called. She was in the medical bay checking supplies when the call came through, and she stepped outside and stood in the corridor and listened to him read the key findings in the flat, careful language of official documentation. The original review board had been convened in procedural violation of 3 separate regulations. The officer who initiated the review, Major Aldrich Strand, had a documented relationship with the intelligence source, whose failure had created the conditions of the unauthorized engagement. The review board's conclusion was vacated. The precision shooter qualification was restored to her official record, effective the date of the original removal, with a notation that the removal had been found to be without procedural basis. She asked Hargrove to repeat the last part. He repeated it. She thanked him. She ended the call. She stood in the corridor and looked at the wall for approximately 30 seconds and felt 67 days and 4 years and a mountain and 12 men on a patrol and a convoy and a broken scope and a name she had been told to stop using. Settle into something that was not closure. Exactly. Closure was a word she had always distrusted, too neat, too final. But resolution. The specific resolution of a thing that has been wrong for a long time and has finally been accurately named. Strand had pled to reduced charges in exchange for cooperation with the broader intelligence investigation. The leak network had been significantly disrupted. 2 other personnel actions in the preceding 4 years were under secondary review. The IG investigation was ongoing and would be ongoing for some time, but the piece that was Evelyn Carter's piece had reached its conclusion. She went back into the medical bay and finished checking the supplies. Mason's return to duty evaluation was on day 71. He passed. Not barely passed with the assessment language that means the evaluating physician has run out of things to flag. She heard this from Daniel, who had apparently been monitoring the process with the dedicated attention of someone who had decided Mason Reed's recovery was a personal project and was treating it accordingly. She was waiting outside the evaluation room when Mason came out. He saw her and stopped. She looked at him, the posture, the color, the way he was standing, versus the way he had been standing 8 days into recovery when she'd visited and found him frustrated and pale, and fighting the particular impatience of a physical person being physically constrained. He looked like himself. He looked completely entirely like himself. "Well," she said, "full clearance." He said it without performing it, just stated it the way he stated things. 6 to 8 weeks turned into 10, but full clearance. Good. He walked toward her, and she met him halfway, which she told herself was purely positional and not at all emotional, and was partly wrong about. They stood about 3 feet apart in a corridor outside a medical evaluation room, and there was too much to say, and they both knew it, and neither of them tried to put it all into words, because the thing between them on that mountain and in the days that followed did not translate into a summary. "I heard about the finding," Mason said. "I know. The qualification restoration." "Yes. How does it feel?" She thought about it with the same honesty she had been applying to that question from multiple directions for 67 days. "Like it should have happened 4 years ago," she said. "Which is true. And also, like it happened at exactly the right time because I needed to be someone who made that shot before I could fully claim the name that came with it." She paused. "Both of those things are true simultaneously." "That's very mature of you." "I've had time to think. 67 days is a lot of time." "Also 4 years." He almost smiled. "Also 4 years." He looked at her directly. Mason. Directly the way that had always been slightly uncomfortable, and was now just the quality of his attention. "What's next?" "Chin called yesterday. There's a new operational team being assembled. Dual capacity designation medic qualified and precision shooter on the same operative." She let the shape of it settle in the air between them. "It's a new designation. The paperwork to create it was filed 3 weeks ago." Mason was quiet for a moment. "Someone designed that designation specifically?" "Yes." "For you specifically?" Chen didn't say that directly. But yes. She paused. "She asked if I was interested. I told her I needed to think about it." "Did you?" "For about 11 seconds. Then I told her yes." He laughed. The real version unguarded, and she noted for the record that it was completely intact and sounded exactly like it had on the mountain when she'd made a joke about the universe's terrible judgment. "And the team," he said. "The new team. Is there room for—" "I already asked," she said. "Hargrove is working on the transfer paperwork." He went still for a moment. Then, "You asked before you knew if I'd passed the evaluation." "You were always going to pass the evaluation." She looked at him steadily. "I've seen you bleed on a mountain and stay conscious long enough to notice things I missed and tell me things I needed to hear. You were always going to pass an evaluation." He was quiet for a long moment. "Ghost," he said, the way he always said it, with the specific weight of someone saying a true name. "Carter," she said. "My name is Carter. You have two names." "Everybody has two names, the one on the form and the one that's true." She paused. "I'm done running from the second one." He nodded once, short, definitive. "Good." They walked out of the medical block into the open air of the base. It was cold, not mountain cold, but cold enough. She felt it on her face and thought briefly of a ridgeline and a broken scope, and 90 seconds, and a choice that had been both the hardest thing she had ever done, and in the end, the most completely herself she had ever been. Daniel Okoye was standing outside, which she had not expected, holding 2 cups of coffee that he had clearly acquired with the same dedicated sourcing effort as before. "How did you know?" Mason asked. "I've been tracking the evaluation schedule for a week," Daniel said without apology. He held out the cups. "Good machine, not the ward machine." She took the coffee and drank it, and it was still significantly better than the ward machine, and the three of them stood together in the cold air and said nothing for a moment, which was the right thing. The only right thing, because some things don't need words, they need presence. The plain fact of people choosing to be in the same place at the same time. She thought about the shot. She thought about how it had felt. Not the fear, not the mathematics, but the moment after, when the vehicle stopped and steam rose from the engine and the mission held, and Mason was still breathing beside her. The moment of having done the thing. The specific, irreplaceable weight of having been equal to the hardest version of the moment. She thought about the 12 men on the patrol 4 years ago who were alive because of a decision that had cost her everything and that she had never once regretted. She thought about Ghost, the call sign, the name, the person, the thing she had buried, and the thing she had found again. Not on a range, not in a training exercise, but in 90 seconds of frozen, imperfect, irreversible commitment on a mountain in winter, with a broken scope and the only weapon available. She thought about what it meant to be defined not by what you had lost, but by what you had done with the loss. And then she stopped thinking about it because Daniel was asking Mason something about the evaluation, and Mason was answering, and the coffee was warm, and the day was moving forward, and there was work to do. There would always be work to do. Ghost had never been a ghost. She had always been exactly here, carrying the kit and the rifle, and the name they had tried to erase, walking toward whatever came next with the unshakable certainty of someone who has already proven in the only conditions that count exactly who she is.